Hi, sixth grade. Today we are going to be talking about the rock cycle. This is kind of the ending segment of our entire rock unit and mineral unit. And what we're going to be doing is putting everything that we've learned already about rocks together. So when we talk about the rock cycle, you should start to try to make some connections. Where have you heard the word cycle before? A lot of you should be thinking you've learned about life cycles before, where we're talking about, the life cycle of a butterfly or the life cycle of a frog. And we're going from a tadpole, egg, to a tadpole to a frog, and how the whole cycle can continue going. You might also be thinking of the word bicycle. You can be thinking of maybe a shape. So what shape do you associate with the word cycle? And I don't know about you, but I think of a circle. Another cycle that you might be thinking of is maybe you've learned about the water cycle. And so now we're going to be talking about the rock cycle. And one question that I asked you to think about and write about before we started talking about this, there was a few actually. Do you think that rocks, we're ever going to run out of rocks? And also, do you think that our Earth is getting larger, smaller, or staying the same? So as we go through this whole process of the rock cycle, I want you to keep those two questions in mind, because by the end, I'd like you to be able to answer those questions. So when we look here, the rock cycle, we kind of use a circle as our base. And we can look at a few different pictures here. There's tons of different types of rock cycles that you might see. Some have a lot of information, some don't have as much. So we're going to take a look at these to kind of help us get started with what type of rock we want to look at. And we're going to start off with the first type of rock that we learned, which was igneous rock. So this is going to be our first here. We can put this anywhere really that we want to on our circle here. So here's igneous rock. We're going to start up here. Now, before we get to igneous rock, we have to think about how does igneous rock form. So you should be thinking that igneous rock forms from magma or lava cooling and hardening. So kind of shrink that up a little bit here. Oops, whoops. Okay, Smart Notebook isn't really wanting to work today. And we'll put that right here. There we go. So that's what has to happen first. We start off with magma or lava cooling and hardening. And then we're going to go and work our way on the rock cycle this way to get igneous rock. So if we think and we kind of look at this whole thing here, we have magma chamber. And what happens is that magma chamber, yep, I'm still on my pen here. The magma chamber here is going to eventually erupt. And so what we have now is this lava flow, and this lava is going to cool and harden. And so we see we have some small crystals forming, and we also have gas bubbles. And so that's going to make us a rock. This rock here is actually scoria. So we're going to have some scoria forming here. So we have a huge bedrock layer of scoria. And so then what's going to happen next, we now have our igneous rock. It's exposed to the elements. What do you think could happen next to this huge layer of bedrock? Well, I see some water here. That water is going to hit up against it. We're going to have some water abrasion going on. We might have some wind abrasion going on. We might have sorry about that, excuse me. We might have some frost wedging happening. Really, we have a whole bunch of what going on. Should be thinking right now, weathering. We're going to have some weathering happening. So right here, And then also with that weathering, we are going to have erosion going on. So if we take a look, we have the transport of sediments also going on over here on this hill. We have a whole bunch of weathering and erosion occurring. So that's going to be our next step on our rock cycle, is weathering and erosion. Oh, and my notebook just does not want to work today. Okay. So weathering and erosion is going to be next. I'm going to put my arrow. I'm going to use blue going from igneous to getting weathered and eroded. And then once we've been weathered and eroded, we have continue on our journey. Oh, there we go. We have it built up here, and we're having deposition happening. And at the same time, we also have deposition, compaction, and cementation going on. That's kind of, there we go, our compaction cementation. So if we click on the sediment here, there's a really good example of what happens with compaction. And then eventually here we have the cementation. And so that's our next step on the rock cycle. Compaction and cementation. It's going to go right here. And that then, once everything gets compacted and cemented together, what type of rock do we end up with? Should be thinking sedimentary rock. So there's our next type of rock here. Now, from this point, we kind of have a few options. Sedimentary rock, we can continue along with this story. Oh, I completely forget every time. Turn off my marker. Okay, so we can continue here. And do you see how that plate over here, we have a plate here and we have a plate here. And what happens is this plate gets pulled down, we're adding pressure to it. And so what we see happening are, we have a rock here, and this one tends to be igneous, but we're going to think that ours is sedimentary. It kind of gets squeezed down there, and the atoms recombine to form new structures. And then the grains align, and we see the foliation occur. And we end up with metamorphic rock. So we need to add, over here, we can add heat and pressure. And that is going to get us, we said once we add the heat and pressure, put our arrow so we know that we're still working our way around here. That can make that sedimentary rock then into a metamorphic rock. Right here. So there's our metamorphic rock. And then they're going to show if we go closer and closer to that heat, we're adding more heat to it. And eventually what's going to happen is we go deeper and go to hotter levels, the minerals in that rock actually start to do what? Well, imagine that. They are going to melt. We're back to the red here. Adding heat, starts to melt, and then we end up with magma or lava again. Usually in this case, we're going to end up with magma. And we are back to the beginning of our cycle. So you can see we have just recycled the rock. The igneous rock that we started off with has gone through all of these changes and is turned right back into magma or lava like it started off. Now the tricky part is we can have some deviations from this plan. We don't always have to go in this continuous circle. So what might happen is maybe we get igneous rock and for some reason it gets pushed back down into the earth instead of getting pushed up. And so we can have this igneous rock melt again, and then it can keep going through the surface. If we have intrusive igneous rock like granite that gets pushed up to the surface, then we can have the weathering and erosion. What can happen here, though, is when we have weathering and erosion, and we should probably maybe add in this keyword here, we get sediments kind of falling right in here. There we go. These sediments, once they're weathered and eroded, they can stay sediments. If they get compacted and cemented together, then they'll become sedimentary rock. That sedimentary rock, though, it might get pushed back underground so quickly we might skip metamorphic altogether, and it might go straight to melting again. Or this sedimentary rock might just stay up on the surface, and we might get it weathered and eroded again, and it might keep going in this loop. Now this igneous rock, maybe it gets pressed down into the earth and we have more heat and pressure added to it, and it can get changed into metamorphic rock and skip the whole sedimentary rock process. So we have a whole list of options here of what we can do depending on what happens to the rock. So if we look at a completed rock cycle here, you can see we have magma, and if this magma cools, it goes through crystallization, it can turn to igneous rock that's intrusive underground, or comes up through the volcano, we can have igneous rock extrusive. You can see the rain there, we're having weathering, and we have erosion, which is what they're using the word transportation for. And then deposition, the sediments, they use the word lithification here. That just means layered. So that's where we're seeing the compaction cementation happening, and it's turning into sedimentary rock. It gets pushed down, we go into metamorphism, so that heat and pressure, and then we get metamorphic rock. And it can get pushed, uplifted and exposed and go straight to weathering, or it can continue to melt and go through igneous. So what's important with the rock cycle is we just always follow our arrows. Another example too here, we'll see weathering, erosion, and deposition. Sometimes they leave off different steps. So you see lithification again, that layering. So that would be the compaction, the cementation again. But you can see over here, they started igneous rock over here instead of up at the top. So it's all about being very careful when you're reading the diagrams and using it to help you answer your questions. So now you're going to have a chance to actually ride the rock cycle and play a game, and you are going to create your own rock cycle as you kind of move through the game and kind of number what spot you're at and when.